So today we're going to start the first part of a two-part journey taking a look at statistical archetype matchups. This one is really for the nerds, okay? This is for the people who really want to like theorize about the game and kind of have a big picture view of how to play Valorant overall. Okay, because some of you may not even know what an archetype is and what I'm talking about, so let me explain that first up, right? An archetype is basically just how you form a comp, right? Like what types of agents are in a comp. So for instance, a double initiator comp would have one controller, two initiators, one duelist, and one sentinel, right? This is kind of the common Ascent comp right here. This would be a double initiator comp. And you can have other versions like a double controller comp, right? Where you've got two controllers, one initiator, one duelist, and one sentinel, like this comp here that's commonly played on Corrode. But then on some maps, you've got kind of the weirder versions where maybe you don't have, you know, one of everything and two of one. Instead, you've got, for instance, double smokes and no sentinel, right? Like here, a popular comp on Bind, and we see this a lot on Bind, right? Where there is no sentinel, right? You're playing double smokes, double initiator with a duelist as well, but no sentinels. And on some maps, you know, these kind of ideas can be pretty popular sometimes. Normally you will have at least one initiator and normally you'll have at least one smokes, but sometimes, like on Icebox, you can have no duelist, and sometimes on a few different maps you can have no sentinel. So that's what an archetype is, and today what we're going to take a look at is the pick rates and non-mirror win rates of each archetype on each map, or at least for today we'll do kind of half of the maps, and tomorrow we'll do the other half in the overall data. And we'll also take a look at how those archetypes individually match up with each other. Okay, so now let's dive into it and start with Abyss. So what you're looking at in this graph here is very simple. It is the pick rate is in red of a certain archetype and the non-mirror win rate is in blue. Non-mirror win rate for archetypes just mean, for instance, if a double initiator comp played against a double duelist comp, that is a non-mirror game. If a double initiator comp played against another double initiator comp, that is not included. So overall, pick rates, let's start with that. So double initiator, as you can see on Abyss, was the most popular overall. Then with kind of this no sentinel double smoke idea coming in next, then double duelist, then double smokes, and then I've kind of just lumped everything that wasn't those four into this other category because it wasn't very much, as you can see. In terms of the win rates, though, you can see that pretty much everything has an okay win rate, apart from double duelist is really struggling. So double duelist is something that we saw, you know, particularly towards the end of the season, right, in champs. We did see some teams play double duelist on Abyss, and it did also happen a little bit at the start of the season as well, but it seems like that was not really that successful of an idea. It seems more so that, you know, double duelist, whilst it does work for quite a few other maps, as we'll see in this video and tomorrow's video, it doesn't seem like Abyss really lends itself that well. Of course, they have changed the map with Abyss a little bit more, so, you know, maybe this is a little outdated, but I think for the most part, double duelist doesn't seem like the best way to approach this map. Okay, and then for each map as well, we're going to have one of these tables. Okay, now what this table is essentially is looking at the individual matchups for each archetype versus every other archetype. Right, so for instance, the way you read this table, so of course you got the archetypes on both sides going across here. Obviously, we're looking at games against other archetypes, so that's why these squares here are grayed out, because, you know, double initiator versus double initiator, we don't care about. The wins are across, so the rows here are the wins and the columns here are the losses. So for instance, if you wanted to know what a certain archetype did against another archetype, what you could do is use these squares in the middle almost like a mirror, right? So double initiator versus double duelist won 5 times, but double duelist beat double initiator 4 times, right? Use this as a mirror, you get that game. Or for instance, double initiator beat double smoke 3 times, but double smoke beat double initiator 6 times, right? That's the way it works. And then here at the bottom, I've just kind of given you some of the kind of the key matchups that, you know, I've just put there very simply so you can all see it. So double smokes beat double initiator 6-3, right? Double initiator beat double duelist 5-4, which, as we saw before, double duelist kind of struggling across the board. But then double initiator beat no senti double smokes, NSDS, 6 times, right? The thing that I find interesting about these two results, right, is obviously you've got kind of the double smokes with a sentinel, you know, pretty handedly. And of course, these are smaller sample sizes because Abyss, for instance, wasn't in the map pool the whole time. But you've got double smokes beating double initiator, but double initiator beat double smokes with no sentinel, right? Which I do find kind of interesting. And again, on maps like Abyss, where maybe the sample sizes aren't massive, maybe that leads you to, you know, be like, well, maybe there's not too much we can take away from that. But on other maps, you'll see there are some big patterns emerging. Okay, let's move on to Ascent then overall. And the takeaway from Ascent here, of course, is that, again, you are expecting a lot of double initiator. And again, you've got over 50% for kind of the old Ascent archetypes. But this year, unlike most years, we have seen a massive rise in double Sentinel. You see that it did okay. It wasn't fantastic, but it did okay. But it did gain a lot of popularity in terms of pick rate. Then you've got double smokes that did pretty well, despite a pretty low pick rate overall. You got kind of BBL with the main ones using this, the triple initiator, which overall didn't do too great across the season. And then at the end here, you got double duelist, right? Which was kind of an idea that Team Heretics were using quite a lot, and it did find some success. And then moving on to the individual archetypes on Ascent as well, you can see that for a map that was in the pool a little bit longer, you do start to get like, you know, double Senti 18, double initiator 17, right? So again, pretty even between these two, and we saw them, you know, again, a lot of archetypes were hovering around 50% here overall, but we did have double duelist beating double initiator quite, you know, a few more times than it lost to it. So maybe that is a direction that, you know, some people will, you know, think about going in on this map, particularly if we, you know, with the nerfs that we're seeing as well, you know, with the new patch, maybe double duelist becomes a little bit more attractive. And I do think that that could be a way, particularly if it is already beating the double initiator. But I did just want to highlight that playing double Senti, you know, did match up okay against double duelist overall. So, you know, if we do see a bit of a swing to double duelist, you might get that kind of swing to double sentinel as well, you know, as kind of a counter to it. Okay, now moving on to Bind. What's interesting about Bind is, unlike Ascent, where, you know, double initiator was like slightly below 50% non-mirror win rate, but, you know, it was still fine. The most popular idea here of going for the no sentinel, double smokes, right, which is kind of like the comp I showed you at the start with the, you know, with playing like Viper stuff. You see that its pick rate is still very high, but its win rate is actually very low, right? A 40% non-mirror win rate for kind of the most popular archetype, that is quite low indeed, right? And that means that basically everything else, all of those, you know, are doing quite well, right? You see particularly double duelist here doing pretty well on Bind overall. And if we take a look at the overall table here for that, you start to see those results come out, right? Like for instance, double duelist 14-8 against the non-Senti double smoke comps, right? So double duelist against kind of the most meta comps, winning quite a lot. Same for kind of the double initiator. So this is playing without a Viper, double initiator with a sentinel, also, you know, did have a favorable win rate as well. Now, one thing that I did want to highlight here is that the double smoke Senti, again, this wasn't a super popular way of playing, right? So you are still playing Viper, you are also playing a sentinel, normally Vise, but sometimes Cypher. That actually was a good way of countering double duelist, right? It wasn't a ton of matchups, but it actually did do pretty well against double duelist overall, right? Because double duelist, I think, would be, you know, where most people are probably looking at going on a map like Bind now. But playing this kind of, you know, really slower double smokes and a sentinel version actually, you know, did do decently well. But what's interesting about that is the pure double sentinel versions did better against kind of, you know, this is like with a Viper and stuff. This is just pure double sentinel. That actually did pretty well against that. So again, you've got kind of, and I would love to see, you know, more of these matchups as we go forward. You've got kind of an interesting, like, I expect most people to go to double duelist, which in turn perhaps means that the kind of default, you know, double initiator, double smoke stuff isn't very good. And so instead, maybe people looking to counter that would play these kind of, you know, even slower, you know, double Senti or double sentinel with the smoke comps. Okay, now let's move on to Corrode, which is a very, very interesting map because, of course, Corrode is a new map, but it looks like the way that most teams read the map and wanted to go as archetype-wise wasn't a good idea, right? They just picked wrong, essentially, because take a look at the most two picked archetypes overall, double smoke Senti and double duelist. Their win rates are atrocious. Their win rates are not very high at all, right? Big problem. And interestingly enough, the team that won champs and the best two teams, I would say, on Corrode at champs, MIBR and NRG, were playing this instead, right? Which is a no sentinel double smoke. So double initiator, double smokes, one duelist. You see how well that did, right? And of course, part of this is MIBR and NRG looking good at champs, right? Part of that is those numbers. And they probably had the best read on that map, and that is the way to play the map, at least before Veto exists. Maybe Veto will change this a bit, but right now, that's the best way of playing this map, okay? And it looks like a lot of teams kind of got that wrong. And that also bears out in the win rates for the individual matchups as well. Because take a look at this, right? So the no smoke double Senti, like NRG comp, 7-1. 7-1 against double smoke Senti, and 6-1 against double duelist. Right, so you can see here, like, domination against these are the two most popular archetypes overall. You see when they play each other, it's quite even. But when they play against that kind of NRG comp or anything like it, they tend to not win. Okay, now on to Fracture. And Fracture is interesting because it's really unlike any other map in that it really only has one archetype, right? So Fracture, of course, wasn't in for a significant amount of time. And it was in basically just during the Teo meta. So, of course, you were going to see a lot of double initiator. Maybe if it came back now, we would see quite a bit more double duelist. But you can see for the data that we got this year on this map, essentially there is no data for this map. Because it just was pretty much all double initiator, right? Like these other things here, like you're looking at 1, maybe 2 games, right? So there's just not really, I mean, look at this. It's just not worth really talking about. So let's move on to Haven instead. And now on Haven, again, if you know about me and you know about Breach on Haven and all that, this will probably come as no surprise to you. But, double initiator was, the most picked overall, but its win rate was not very good because double initiator on Haven hasn't been good for a very long time. I've called this Fnatic here. This is kind of the Fnatic ISO stuff and was a pretty popular idea earlier on in the season, but that did start to give way for more kind of double ideas, be that Jet Yoru, Neon Yoru ideas if you were going to play double duelist later on. But you actually see that didn't do that well. You had double smokes. Obviously, double Senti did do pretty well, but it's a pretty small sample size. But double smokes, did have a pretty significant pick rate and, was pretty good. Turns out Viper is pretty good on Haven. And that also does bear out as well in terms of some of the win rates. You got the Fnatic here. This is actually the most played with the Fnatic version versus the double initiator. And you see the Fnatic comps basically destroyed the double initiator. And it wasn't just Fnatic playing this comp, by the way. Quite a few teams ended up playing that comp. But one thing I did want to point out is that perhaps for the most common ways of playing the map, right, you've got double smokes, double initiator, and double dive at this point in the game's history. But double smokes beats both of the other most popular ones. And so what I wanted to talk about is there wasn't many gamers of this, but double sentinel did do well against double smokes. Okay? So maybe if we do start to see, and I would expect to see right now, a lot of Viper on Haven, maybe the answer, and again, this is a small sample size, so it might not end up being, but maybe the answer is playing double Senti. And then let's finish today's video by talking about Icebox. So here on Icebox, again, we did have a bit of a range of things going on. Again, double initiator with, a normal duelist, whatever, was again the most popular thing to do overall, but wasn't very good, which is a bit of a theme and kind of an interesting theme that you might think about, that on quite a few of these maps, whatever has been the most popular archetype hasn't tended to do that great, right? Which is maybe something to think about as well. Double Senti you see here kind of playing the stage, yep, was a very good option. Double smokes with a duelist and double smokes without a duelist as well did, okay overall as well, and had, a pretty significant pick rate overall. And on Icebox, when we come to the individual matchups here, really there is a very clear story that is told, essentially, right? Which is that you've got the double smokes with a duelist, double smokes with no duelist here. They both beat double initiator. Double initiator is at the lowest rung. Then you've got the two double smokes versions, which are okay, and, do beat double initiator, but they lose to double Senti, right? Double Senti has a positive matchup against both of them so far, and double sentinel, if you take a look here, is also 4-1 against double initiator, right? So basically there's a kind of clear hierarchy on Icebox, which is double sentinel at the top, then you've got the kind of double smoke stuff kind of in the middle, which is okay, and then at the bottom you've got the double initiator, or at least that is what is told from this season. Okay, so that is the data for today. Tomorrow we'll take a look at the maps that I haven't talked about thus far, and also the overall data as well, which again I think is interesting and will bring up some interesting discussions about maybe where the game is going and maybe whether this patch was a mistake, because you maybe have seen that the double initiators tended to not do so well on quite a few of those maps.